Four men made a grave mistake when they rode off with a widow's last horse. But their worst mistake wasn't the theft. It was not knowing who would come hunting them. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Wyoming wind cut across the small ranch like a blade, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant rain. Grace Whitmore stood on the weathered porch of her cabin, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid, her green eyes scanning the horizon with the vigilance of someone who had learned never to trust the silence. 3 years had passed since the fever took her husband, Michael, leaving her alone on this patch of land with nothing but memories and the horses that had been their shared dream. Among those horses, one stood apart. Storm, a magnificent white mare with eyes like liquid silver, was the last gift Michael had given her before his death. The horse was more than an animal. She was a living connection to the man Grace had loved, a reminder of better days when laughter filled this cabin, and the future seemed bright with possibility. Grace descended the porch steps, her boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. November in Wyoming was unforgiving, and she could feel winter's approach in every gust of wind. She made her way to the stable, a modest structure Michael had built with his own hands, reinforced over the years to withstand the brutal mountain weather. Inside, Storm nickered softly, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Grace ran her hand along the mare's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the sleek coat. "Good morning, beautiful girl," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of her solitude. "Just you and me today, like always." The other 3 horses shifted in their stalls, but Grace's attention remained on Storm. This horse represented her last valuable asset, the one thing she could sell if the coming winter proved too harsh, if the money ran out before spring arrived. But the thought of losing Storm felt like losing Michael all over again, and Grace pushed the dark consideration from her mind. She was preparing the morning feed when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Grace tensed immediately. Visitors were rare out here, 15 miles from the nearest town of Bitterroot. She stepped out of the stable, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle she kept mounted by the door. 4 men rode into her yard, their horses tired and their faces hard with the kind of wear that came from living rough. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. His name was Dutch Keller, and Grace knew him by reputation alone. He was a horse thief, a man who moved through the territories taking what he wanted and leaving ruin in his wake. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dutch said, tipping his hat in a mockery of respect. "Heard you got some fine horses out here. Thought we might take a look, maybe make you an offer." Grace's grip tightened on the rifle. "My horses aren't for sale. I'll ask you to leave my property." Dutch's smile widened, showing teeth stained by tobacco. "Now that's not very hospitable. We've been riding hard, and our horses need rest. Surely you wouldn't turn away travelers in need." "I would, and I am. Turn around and ride out." The 3 men with Dutch fanned out slightly, a movement that was far from casual. One of them, a younger man with cruel eyes, spat into the dirt. "Boss, why are we wasting time talking to her?" Dutch raised a hand, silencing his companion. "You see, Mrs. Whitmore, here's the thing. We're going to look at those horses whether you like it or not. Now you can make this easy on yourself, or you can make it hard. But either way, we're looking." Grace raised the rifle, aiming it directly at Dutch's chest. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She was one woman against 4 men, and they all knew how this would end if it came to violence. "I said leave." Dutch's expression darkened. He nodded to his men, and they dismounted in unison, moving with the practiced coordination of men who had done this before. Grace fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of the rifle echoing across the valley. The men didn't even flinch. "Take the horses," Dutch ordered. "All of them." What happened next unfolded with terrible speed. Grace tried to aim at the men approaching the stable, but one of them rushed her from the side, knocking the rifle from her hands. She fought, landing a solid punch that split the man's lip, but he backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground. The taste of blood filled her mouth, and her vision blurred with tears of rage and helplessness. From the ground, she watched as they led her horses out, one by one. The 3 geldings went first, nervous but manageable. Then Storm emerged, her white coat gleaming even in the gray morning light. The mare sensed the wrongness of the situation, rearing and pulling against the rope, but Dutch himself took the lead, speaking soft words that contrasted sharply with the violence of what was happening. Grace pushed herself up, ignoring the pain in her jaw. "Please," she said, hating the weakness in her voice but unable to stop herself. "Not Storm. Take the others, but leave her. She's all I have left." Dutch paused, looking back at her with something that might have been pity on another man's face. On his, it looked like contempt. "That's exactly why we're taking her, ma'am. She's the valuable one. You'll survive. You're young enough to start over." They mounted their horses, leading her stolen animals behind them. Grace stood in her yard, blood dripping from her split lip, watching everything she had left disappear toward the eastern horizon. The fury that filled her in that moment was almost enough to warm her against the cold wind. But fury alone wouldn't bring Storm back. She needed help, real help, and there was only one place she knew to find it. Grace cleaned her face, changed into riding clothes, and saddled the old mule Michael had kept for hauling supplies. The animal was too old and too slow to be worth stealing, which meant it was now her only transportation. She locked the cabin, took what money she had hidden beneath a floorboard, and rode toward the Comanche camp that lay 20 miles to the south. The journey took most of the day. By the time Grace spotted the teepees arranged in the sheltered valley, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. She knew coming here was dangerous. Relations between the white settlers and the Comanche had been tense for years, marked by broken treaties and mutual distrust. But Grace also knew that the Comanche were the finest trackers in the territories, and that some among them hired out their skills to those who could pay. She was stopped by 2 warriors before she reached the camp's edge. They spoke to her in their language, their expressions stern, and Grace raised her hands to show she meant no harm. "I need to speak with someone," she said slowly. "I need help tracking stolen horses. I can pay." One of the warriors gestured for her to wait, then disappeared into the camp. Minutes passed like hours as Grace sat on the mule, very aware of the eyes watching her from between the teepees. Children peeked out curiously, women paused in their work to stare, and warriors stood with arms crossed, their faces revealing nothing. Finally, a man emerged from one of the larger teepees. He was tall and powerfully built, his long black hair adorned with eagle feathers, his face marked with the scars of a warrior who had seen battle. But what struck Grace most were his eyes, dark and penetrating, holding an intelligence that seemed to see through all pretense. He approached her with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping a few feet from the mule. When he spoke, his English was clear, though accented. "I am Nako. They say you seek a tracker." Grace dismounted, meeting his gaze directly despite the fear racing through her. "4 men stole my horses this morning. One of them is very important to me, a white mare. I'm told the Comanche are the best trackers in these territories. I'm willing to pay for help getting her back." Nako studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "What makes you think I would help a white woman hunt white men?" The question hung in the air between them. Grace considered lying, offering some diplomatic answer, but something about this man's directness demanded the same in return. "Because I'm betting you value justice over the color of someone's skin. Because those men are thieves who would steal from anyone, including your people. And because I'm desperate." A slight smile touched the corner of Nako's mouth, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "How much can you pay?" Grace named the sum she had brought, knowing it was likely not enough but having nothing else to offer. Nako's expression didn't change, but she saw something shift in his eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or consideration. "That is not enough for what you ask," he said finally, "but I will make you a different offer. I will track your horses and help you take them back. In return, when we succeed, I keep one of the horses you recover. Not the white mare, one of the others." Grace's mind raced. She would lose a horse either way, but this gave her a chance to keep Storm. "Agreed," she said, extending her hand. Nako looked at her outstretched hand for a moment before gripping it firmly. His hand was calloused and warm, and the handshake was brief, but solid. "We leave at first light. Can you ride hard for days if needed?" "I can do whatever it takes." "Good, you will stay here tonight. My sister will give you a place to sleep. Tomorrow we hunt. As Nako turned to make arrangements, Grace felt the first flicker of hope since watching Storm disappear over the horizon. She didn't know this warrior, didn't know if she could truly trust him, but she had made her choice. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin, and one way or another she would have Storm back or die trying. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Comanche camp, the sky transforming from deep indigo to pale gold, as Grace emerged from the teepee where she had spent the night. Nako's sister, a woman named Kimi with kind eyes and gentle hands, had offered her food and a warm place to sleep, treating her with a courtesy that surprised Grace given the tensions between their peoples. Now, as Grace checked the supplies Kimi had helped her pack, she felt the weight of what lay ahead settling onto her shoulders. Nako appeared leading 2 horses, both strong and well-muscled, bred for endurance rather than speed. He had changed from the ceremonial clothing of the previous evening into practical traveling gear, buckskin pants, a heavy shirt, and a coat lined with fur. His weapons were simple, but well-maintained. A rifle, a knife, and a bow with a quiver of arrows. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. "Your mule stays here," he said without preamble. "You ride one of these. Can you handle her?" He gestured to a roan mare with intelligent eyes. Grace approached the horse, letting it smell her hand before running her palm along its neck. "I grew up with horses. I can handle her." "Good. We have a long ride ahead. The men who took your horses have a day's lead, but they are moving slower because they are leading stolen animals. We will gain on them if we push hard." They mounted and rode out of the camp as the sun cleared the horizon, heading east across the Wyoming wilderness. The landscape was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass, stands of pine and aspen, rocky outcroppings that rose like ancient sentinels. The wind carried the promise of snow, and Grace pulled her coat tighter around herself. For the first few hours they rode in silence. Nako's attention was focused entirely on the ground, reading signs that were invisible to Grace's untrained eyes. Occasionally he would dismount, examining tracks or broken vegetation, his expression intense with concentration. Grace watched him work, impressed by the methodical way he pieced together the trail. It was near midday when Nako finally spoke. "They are moving toward the Montana border. 4 horses, 4 riders, 4 stolen animals. They stopped twice during the night, but not for long. They know they are being pursued." "How can they know?" Grace asked. "We only started this morning." Nako glanced at her, and she saw a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. Men like these, they always know. They live expecting pursuit. It makes them careless in some ways, overconfident in others. That will work in our favor. They pushed on, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat the dried meat and bread Kimi had packed. As they rode, Grace found herself studying her companion. Nako moved with the land rather than against it, his posture relaxed but alert, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. There was something magnetic about him, a quality that went beyond his physical strength or his obvious skill as a tracker. "Why did you agree to help me?" Grace asked as they watered the horses at a small creek. "The truth, not the business arrangement we made." Nako was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 5 years ago, white soldiers came to our winter camp. They said we had stolen cattle from a rancher, though we had not. They took our horses as punishment, left us to face winter without them. My younger brother died that winter from cold and hunger during a hunting trip that should have been easy on horseback. The men who took your horses, they are the same kind of men. Different faces, same hearts. I help you because what was done to you was wrong, and because sometimes the chance to balance the scales is worth more than gold." Grace felt the sincerity in his words, the shared understanding of loss that connected them across the divide of their different worlds. "I'm sorry about your brother. I lost my husband 3 years ago to fever. Storm, the white mare they took, she was his last gift to me. She's all I have left of him. And then we will get her back," Nako said simply, and the certainty in his voice made Grace believe it was possible. As the sun began to set on their first day of tracking, they made camp in a sheltered hollow surrounded by rocks. Nako built a small fire, carefully positioned so the smoke would dissipate among the rocks rather than rising in a telltale column. They ate in comfortable silence, and Grace found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. "Tell me about him," Nako said suddenly. "Your husband." Grace looked up, surprised by the question. "Michael. He was a good man, a dreamer. He believed we could build something lasting out here, a ranch that would thrive, a legacy. He loved horses more than almost anything, could gentle the wildest stallion with nothing but patience and soft words. When the fever took him, it happened so fast. 3 days, and he was gone. I've been alone ever since, trying to keep his dream alive, but it's been hard. And the white mare, why is she special? Michael found her as a foal, abandoned and nearly dead. He nursed her back to health, trained her himself. He used to say she had a spirit that couldn't be broken, only partnered with. A week before he died, he made me promise I would never sell her, never give her up. Keeping her has been my way of keeping my promise to him, of holding on to the life we were supposed to have together." Nako nodded slowly. "A promise to the dead is sacred. We will honor it." The night deepened around them, stars emerging in brilliant profusion across the black sky. Grace wrapped herself in her bedroll near the fire, aware of Nako sitting watch a few feet away, his silhouette sharp against the starlight. Despite the danger ahead, despite sleeping on the cold ground far from civilization, she felt safer than she had in years. The second day of tracking brought them into rougher country. The trail led through a series of canyons and ravines, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. Nako's expression grew more focused, more intense. "They are trying to lose anyone following," he explained, "taking the hard path, hoping pursuers will give up. But they leave signs anyway. See here." He pointed to a scrape on a rock face, a horse's shoe, and here, disturbed stones. "They passed through less than 6 hours ago. We are closing the distance." By late afternoon, they reached the summit of a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Nako dismounted, pulling Grace down beside him and pointing. Far below, nearly invisible against the landscape, was a thin column of smoke. "There," he said quietly. "They have made camp early. Perhaps their horses are tired, or perhaps they believe they have lost any pursuit. Either way, this is our chance." "We go in tonight?" Grace asked, her heart beginning to pound with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "We scout first, learn their patterns. Then we decide. 4 against 2 are not good odds, but surprise is worth more than numbers. And I did not come all this way to fail." They descended the ridge as darkness fell, moving with painstaking care through the rocky terrain. Nako led them to a position overlooking the thieves' camp, close enough to see details but far enough to remain undetected. Grace could make out 4 figures sitting around a fire, and beyond them, tied to a line strung between 2 trees, were the horses. Even in the fading light, Storm's white coat stood out like a beacon. They watched for hours, observing the patterns of the camp. Dutch and his men were confident, even careless. They passed a bottle between them, their voices carrying on the night air, talking about the money they would make selling the horses in Montana. One man was supposed to be keeping watch, but he spent more time drinking than watching. "When the moon sets," Nako whispered, "we move. I will take the guard, you free the horses. We lead them away quietly. If shooting starts, you ride hard for that gap in the rocks to the north. Do not stop. Do not look back. Understand?" Grace nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. The reality of what they were about to do crashed over her. These were violent men, killers perhaps, and she was about to steal from them in the middle of the night. But the thought of Storm, of the promise she had made to Michael, steadied her resolve. The hours crawled past as they waited for the moon to set. The camp below gradually quieted, 3 of the men rolling into their bedrolls while the 4th, the young one with cruel eyes, sat watch. He was drinking steadily, his attention wandering. Finally, Nako touched her arm. "Now." They moved like shadows down the slope. Grace's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone in the valley could hear it. But Nako's calm presence beside her kept her focused. They split up as they neared the camp, Nako circling toward the guard while Grace angled toward the horses. Storm sensed her approach, ears pricking forward. Grace sent a silent prayer that the mare would remain quiet. would recognize her despite the darkness and the tense situation. She reached the rope line, her fingers working at the knots with trembling urgency. Behind her, she heard a soft sound, like a sigh, then silence. She didn't turn, trusting that Nako had done what needed to be done. The first horse came free, then the second. Storm nuzzled her shoulder, and Grace had to fight back tears of relief. Then everything went wrong. One of the sleeping men stirred, perhaps sensing something amiss. He sat up, his eyes adjusting to the darkness, and saw Grace with the horses. "Thieves!" he shouted, reaching for his gun. "Dutch! Someone's taking the horses!" The camp exploded into chaos. Dutch and the others scrambled from their bedrolls, weapons appearing in their hands. Nako emerged from the shadows, his rifle barking once, twice. One of the thieves went down screaming, clutching his leg. "Ride!" Nako shouted. "Grace, ride now!" Grace swung onto Storm's bare back, her hands tangled in the mare's mane, the other horse's leads gripped tight. She kicked Storm into motion, and the mare responded instantly, surging forward with the other horses following. Gunfire erupted behind her, bullets whining through the air, but she focused on the gap in the rocks Nako had pointed out, trusting Storm's sure footing in the darkness. She heard hoofbeats behind her and risked a glance back. Nako was following on his horse, riding low and fast, returning fire at the pursuers. Dutch and one of his men had managed to reach their own horses and were giving chase, their faces twisted with fury in the muzzle flashes of their guns. The chase lasted for miles through the darkness, a desperate flight through unfamiliar terrain. Storm ran with the heart of a champion, never faltering, never hesitating, carrying Grace as if she weighed nothing. The other horses kept pace, driven by fear and the instinct to follow the herd. Gradually the gunfire faded behind them. The thieves' horses, already tired from days of hard travel, couldn't match the pace. When Grace finally dared to slow down, glancing back, she saw no signs of pursuit. Nako pulled alongside her, his face grim but triumphant. "Keep moving," he said. "We need distance before we rest. They will try again at first light if they can." They rode through the remainder of the night, putting miles between themselves and Dutch's camp. Only when the eastern sky began to lighten did Nako finally signal a halt in a protected canyon with water and grass for the horses. Grace slid from Storm's back, her legs shaking with exhaustion and aftermath. She checked the mare carefully, running her hands over every inch, looking for injuries. Storm was winded but unhurt, nuzzling Grace's shoulder with the familiar affection that brought tears to Grace's eyes. "Thank you," she said to Nako, her voice breaking. "You saved her. You saved all of them." Nako was checking his own horse, but he looked up at her words. Something in his expression had changed, softened. "You rode well. Many would have frozen when the shooting started. You did not." "I had good motivation," Grace said, stroking Storm's neck, "and a good partner." Their eyes met across the small distance, and Grace felt something shift between them, a connection that went beyond their business arrangement, beyond the successful recovery of her horses. Nako looked away first, but not before she saw the same awareness reflected in his dark eyes. The morning sun climbed higher as Grace and Nako rested in the protected canyon, their horses grazing peacefully on the sparse grass growing near the water. The adrenaline of the night's escape had faded, leaving Grace exhausted but exhilarated. She had Storm back, along with her other 3 horses, and they had survived an encounter that could have easily ended in death. Nako sat against a rock, cleaning his rifle with practiced efficiency. Grace noticed a dark stain spreading across his left sleeve, and alarm jolted through her. "You're hurt," she said, moving quickly to his side. He glanced at his arm with the detached interest of someone accustomed to injury. "A bullet grazed me. It is nothing serious." "Let me see," Grace insisted, her tone brooking no argument. She had nursed Michael through enough ranch injuries to know basic wound care, and she wasn't about to let Nako's stoicism lead to infection or worse. Nako hesitated, then relented, shrugging out of his coat and rolling up his sleeve. The wound was indeed a graze, a furrow carved along the outside of his upper arm, where a bullet had passed too close. It was bleeding, but not severely, and Grace felt relief wash through her. "I need to clean this," she said, retrieving her canteen and the cloth Kimi had packed. As she worked, carefully cleaning the wound with water, she was acutely aware of the warmth of Nako's skin under her fingers, the controlled strength in the muscles of his arm. You could have been killed last night. You put yourself at risk for my horses, for a promise I made to a dead man. Nako watched her work, his expression thoughtful. I told you why I helped, but that was not the only reason. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was quieter. When I saw you standing in my camp, refusing to back down despite your fear, demanding help even though you knew the danger, I saw strength, real strength, not the kind that comes from weapons or numbers, but the kind that comes from here. He touched his chest over his heart. That kind of strength is rare. It deserves to be honored. Grace's hands stilled for a moment, her eyes meeting his. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I've never thought of myself as strong. These past 3 years I've just been surviving, holding on by my fingernails. Survival requires strength, Nako said. You stood alone on that ranch, kept it running, refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. That is the definition of strength. Grace finished bandaging his arm, tearing strips from her spare shirt to secure the dressing. Their faces were close now, and she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, with the acknowledgement of something neither had expected to find. We should keep moving, Nako said finally, though he made no immediate move to pull away. Dutch and his men will not give up easily. They have lost their prize and their pride. Men like that become dangerous when cornered. Grace nodded, forcing herself to focus on the practical reality of their situation. They packed up quickly, mounted their horses, and continued westward, back toward Wyoming and Grace's ranch. The captured horses followed docilely, Storm staying close to Grace's side as if unwilling to let her out of sight. They traveled for 2 more days, pushing hard but being careful not to exhaust the horses. Nako taught Grace how to read the land, pointing out signs of water and shelter, explaining how to move through country without leaving obvious trails. Grace found herself absorbing every word, fascinated not just by the knowledge but by the man sharing it. At night, around their small campfires, they talked. Nako told her about growing up in the Comanche nation, about the traditions and wisdom passed down through generations, about the encroachment of white settlers, and the painful reality of watching his people's way of life slowly disappear. Grace shared her own story, the dreams she and Michael had held, the loneliness of the years since his death, her determination to make something meaningful of her life despite the hardships. What will you do now? Nako asked on their second evening. You have your horses back, but Dutch Keller is not a man who forgets. He knows where you live. He may come back, bring more men. The question had been haunting Grace since their escape. I don't know, she admitted. The ranch is all I have. I can't just abandon it, but I also can't defend it alone against determined men. Nako stared into the fire, his expression serious. There may be another way. My people, we need horses. Good horses, trained by someone who understands them. What if you did not face the future alone? What if there was a partnership, an arrangement that benefited both our peoples? Grace's heart began to beat faster. What kind of arrangement? You have skill with horses, land for raising them. My people have warriors who need mounts, knowledge of the territory, protection in numbers. Together we could build something, a ranch that serves both worlds, that bridges the divide between our peoples. He looked at her directly. I could stay, help you rebuild, make the ranch defensible. In return, you train horses for the Comanche at fair prices. We protect you. You provide what we need. But more than that, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. More than that, I would stay because I want to. Because in these few days I have seen in you something I thought I would never find. A partner, in the truest sense. Someone who faces the world with courage and keeps her promises even when it costs her everything. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of hope rather than sorrow. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Nako reached across the fire, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but gentle. I am saying that I want to stand beside you, to help you keep Michael's dream alive but also to build a new dream, one that belongs to both of us. I am saying that when I think of riding back to my camp and leaving you alone on that ranch, Something inside me refuses. I am saying that I believe we could be good together, if you are willing to try. Grace's answer came without hesitation. She moved around the fire, sitting beside him, her hand still clasped in his. I'm willing. More than willing. These past days with you, I've felt more alive than I have in 3 years. I felt like myself again, like the woman I was before grief tried to hollow me out. I would be honored to have you stay, to build something new together. Nako's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Then we will make it so. Together we will make your ranch stronger. We will raise the finest horses in Wyoming, and we will show both our peoples that understanding and partnership are possible, even in these divided times. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender and fierce all at once, a seal on the promise they were making to each other, and to the future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. The weight of loneliness and uncertainty lifted from their shoulders. The next morning, they crested the final ridge overlooking Grace's ranch. The cabin stood just as she had left it, small and weathered but still standing, still home. As they descended toward it, Grace felt Nako's presence beside her like a warmth against the cold wind, a solid reality she could depend on. But as they approached the yard, they saw something that made them both pull up short. 3 horses were tied outside the cabin, and smoke rose from the chimney. Dutch Keller and 2 of his men had found the ranch and were waiting. They must have ridden straight here when they lost us, Nako said quietly, his hand moving to his rifle. They knew you would return home eventually. Grace's first instinct was fear, but then she looked at Storm, at the other horses they had recovered, at Nako beside her, and the fear transformed into steely determination. This is my home. I'm not running, and I'm not letting them take anything more from me. Agreed, Nako said, but we need a plan. 3 armed men in a defensive position are dangerous. We need to make them come out, level the field. Grace thought quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. The stable, it's filled with hay and it's separate from the cabin. If we set it on fire, they'll have to come out to see what's happening. When they do, we'll have the advantage of position and surprise. Nako looked at her with approval, and something deeper, a respect that went beyond admiration for a clever plan. You are willing to burn your own stable? I can rebuild a stable. I can't rebuild my life if I'm dead, or if I let fear drive me away. Besides, Michael always said the cabin was what mattered, not the outbuildings. He built them to be replaced as needed. They circled wide around the ranch, approaching from the back where a small rise provided cover. Nako prepared a torch from dried grass and a branch, while Grace positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the cabin's front door. Her hands were steady as she checked her rifle, and she marveled at how much she had changed in just a few days. The frightened widow who had ridden into a Comanche camp was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength. Nako lit the torch and sprinted to the stable, touching the flame to the hay inside before racing back to cover. The fire caught quickly, hungry flames licking up the dry wood, smoke billowing into the clear morning air. Inside the cabin, they heard shouts of alarm. The door burst open, and Dutch appeared, followed by his 2 remaining men. They stared at the burning stable in confusion. Then Dutch's eyes swept the area, searching for the source of the fire. "Come out, Mrs. Whitmore," he shouted. "I know you're here somewhere. You and that Indian who helped you steal from us, we can settle this peaceful-like, or we can settle it with blood. Your choice." Grace stood up from behind the rise, her rifle aimed steady at Dutch's chest. "You're on my property, Keller. You stole from me first. This ends now. You and your men ride out and we'll call it even. You stay, and we'll finish what you started." Dutch's face twisted with rage. "You think you can threaten me? You're just a woman and a savage. We'll kill you both and take what we want anyway." "Try it," Nako said, standing beside Grace, his own rifle trained on one of Dutch's men. "But know that the first shot you fire will be your last. We have the high ground. We have clear shots and we have nothing to lose. You, on the other hand, have your lives. Choose wisely." For a long moment the standoff held, tension crackling in the air like lightning about to strike. Grace could see the calculation in Dutch's eyes, weighing his pride against his survival instinct. His men looked nervous, their guns wavering slightly, clearly not as committed to this fight as their leader. Finally, one of Dutch's men spoke up, his voice shaking. "Dutch, this ain't worth it. We already lost one man back in Montana, and we got nothing to show for it. Let's just ride out." Dutch's jaw clenched, fury radiating from him, but Grace could see the moment when pragmatism won out over pride. "This ain't over," he snarled. "You hear me? This ain't over by a long shot." "Yes, it is," Grace said firmly, "because if I see you anywhere near my property again, I won't give you a choice to leave. I'll shoot first and not bother with questions. Now get on your horses and ride out before I change my mind about letting you go at all." Dutch and his men backed toward their horses, mounting quickly but keeping their eyes on Grace and Nako. They wheeled their mounts and galloped away to the east, disappearing over the horizon in a cloud of dust. Only when they were completely out of sight did Grace lower her rifle, her arms trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Nako put his hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You did well. You gave them a chance to leave with their lives, which is more mercy than they deserved." Grace turned to look at the burning stable, watching the flames consume the structure. It hurt to see it go, but not as much as she had expected. It was just wood and nails after all. What mattered was standing beside her, solid and real, and committed to staying. Over the following weeks, Grace and Nako rebuilt. The stable rose again, stronger than before, with help from some of Nako's Comanche brothers, who came to assist once word spread of the partnership. Grace worked alongside them, learning their language, sharing meals, building bridges between worlds that had been divided for too long. Storm thrived in the renewed energy of the ranch, and Grace began training horses in earnest, using the techniques Michael had taught her combined with the wisdom Nako and his people shared. The ranch became a place of collaboration, where Comanche warriors brought wild mustangs to be gentled and trained, where white neighbors slowly overcame their prejudices as they saw the quality of the horses being produced. Grace and Nako's relationship deepened with each passing day, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that had been forged in the crucible of danger and challenge. 6 months after their first meeting, they were married in a ceremony that honored both their traditions, with Grace wearing a dress trimmed in beadwork created by Kimmy and Nako, dressed in his finest ceremonial clothing. As Grace stood beside her husband on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over land that now felt truly like home again, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The theft of Storm had seemed like the final blow, the loss that would break her completely. Instead, it had been the beginning of something new, something better than she could have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Nako asked, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. Grace leaned into his warmth, watching Storm graze peacefully in the path